Welcome to Thriving in the Age of Disruption with Dr. Ramesh. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Ramesh meets with Chrystie Dao, an inspiring entrepreneur and venture builder with a rich multicultural background. Chrystie shares her compelling story from fleeing Vietnam as a refugee child to carving out a successful international career in banking and tech entrepreneurship, thriving in different cities from Sydney, London to Singapore, and ultimately back to her ancestral home of Hanoi. Chrystie shares her early life challenges, such as dealing with racism and adapting to new environments, which built her resilience and shaped her entrepreneurial mindset. Chrystie now plays a pivotal role in Vietnam's startup ecosystem, focusing on venture building, social impact, and sustainability. Additionally, she shares her practices of meditation and mindfulness, which help her manage crises and maintain balance. This groundedness brings to life her commitment and vision to contribute to her country's thriving startup ecosystem and build a brighter future for the Vietnamese people.
Chrystie, welcome to Thriving in the Age of Disruption podcast. We started this podcast in December of 2021 during the COVID times to give people who are listening a slice of life variety from different people so that they can see that the journey to entrepreneurship is very varied. And at the same time, you can start anywhere and there's no right or wrong answer about it. Some of the people who have participated in our discussions, they range from entrepreneurs to impact change makers to people in the ecosystem like yourself. So let's start off with our discussion. Chrystie, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do in life and your journey.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for having me on the podcast. The best way to describe me, made in Saigon, assembled in Sydney, improved in London, commercialized in Singapore, and now repackaged in Hanoi. So that kind of sums up my journey in life. I was a child of refugee parents. My parents left Vietnam on a boat with me in tow and my older brother when we were quite young. So we sailed the open seas and landed in an island of Indonesia, very close to Singapore, where I've been living for the last 8 years. We finally resettled in Australia. I grew up in Sydney. I was educated there and embarked on a banking career, which took me to London and spent a lot of time in Europe as well. So I worked in many cities in Europe, came back to Sydney for a few years and felt another need to move and learn and spread my wings. So I ended up in Singapore in 2016. And that's where I started my entrepreneurship journey. Back in actually February 2023, I found myself moving back to Hanoi. And that was a very spiritual calling from my ancestors to come back to really contribute to the thriving startup ecosystem in Vietnam. So this is where I met you. So that's pretty much my journey in a nutshell.
We've heard about Vietnam's past and a lot of people who had to move out during the troubled times. How was it for you to grow up in an environment outside of Vietnam? When you were in Sydney, how was it like?
I was pretty young when I left, so I have sketchy memories of my childhood, but I still sometimes I have these flashbacks of my escape on the boat. We had 3 tries and we finally succeeded on the 3rd go, I believe. And I still have flashbacks of my movements as a child escaping, what was that, and my journey on the boat, actually. I started primary school in Australia, and as back in those days, Australia was a very white culture, a very white country, and Asians were quite foreign. I think the first wave of Vietnamese were in the late 70s and 80s. Was very few Vietnamese kids at school in Australia. I grew up in Sydney. So I experienced, I guess, a lot of racism, but at a very young age, you didn't know what racism was. You was treated a bit differently and you were called different names. I guess that's where I built thick skin and resilience and to get used to the fact that I was different and accepted my difference because I wasn't white, I wasn't blonde, I wasn't blue-eyed. So that kind of made me a little bit stronger later in life. But yeah, so I was always different, which kind of made me to believe that to be different is fine and to accept being different.
Excellent. I was born in Sri Lanka and my parents left in the early 70s for Singapore to give us a better opportunity. I remember as a 6-year-old flying out to Singapore was difficult because I had all these attachments to the extended family. And then I was going to be living with just my parents. So it took a while for me to grow up and let go of that. So thank you for sharing your story. What I wanted to talk about was the entrepreneurial mindset. And you're someone who has actually spent enough time in the corporate world, being an entrepreneur yourself, and now you're also involved with venture fund as well as incubation. I say that someone who has an entrepreneurial mindset is resourceful. That means you're able to define what the problem is, and you look at getting the problem sorted out. Number two, you're also very effective in dealing with uncertainty and in managing risk. And lastly, of course, you're able to create value, both financial and non-financial value, not just for yourself, but also for everyone else. Let's hear a little bit about your own entrepreneurial journey and how this mindset has supported you in your journey.
Sure. There's a saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So my parents were very entrepreneurial people and had multiple businesses in Australia when I was growing up. But interestingly, my father was very entrepreneurial. He started the first English school in Saigon back in 1970. And this was on the back of this great interest after learning English because a lot of Americans were stationed in Vietnam. So my dad had a very thriving business, which is English school. So when my parents moved to Australia, they had multiple businesses. The first being a bakery, banh mi shop, right? And that was around mid-1980s. And it was the first Vietnamese bakery. And I still remember the shop name called the French Hot Bread Shop. As a young child, I was forced to help my parents work on the weekends. I was serving customers. And then having moved from the bakery, they opened another bakery. And then they moved on to have other businesses such as in real estate. They had a Vietnamese sports shop. And they had also what they called a lottery shop in Australia where you can go and buy lotto. Having worked in many of my parents' businesses taught me to be quite entrepreneurial. I saw how they were dealing with things, and I saw my parents having to deal with many difficult situations as well, because in the life of an entrepreneur, it's always ups and downs, right? And I saw they had to work really long hours, always borrowing back finances and trying to grow the business and throwing everything they had into the business. I saw that growing up, and I swore to myself that I would never be an entrepreneur because I saw how difficult it was. And so that kind of shaped my career and chose a banking career where I felt that it was stable, gave me a stable income, but it also allowed me to travel the world and see different countries. And so that's what I set up my career to become. And I did live in many cities. I did experience amazing things as part of an over 20-year banking career. But something was amiss along my career path. And I thought that I wanted to do something for myself. There was a calling, to be my own boss. But even as a banker, I remember the way I dealt with my clients or within the organization, I was always looking outside the box in terms of my own team or my own products, always trying to forge alliances, trying to look at how I could provide more for my customers, more for my employer. So it was always looking at, okay, how can I work with that team or the other team to provide a much more global solution for my clients and not very much just whatever my team was tasked with. I was always wanting to solve problems for my clients, right? Looking beyond borders all the time. Although I was maybe stationed in either Australia or London or Singapore, I was looking at how do I offer something much more valuable so that my customers will always choose me as the ultimate provider. So I think my childhood growing up with having worked in my parents' various businesses and seeing that helped shape my mind and shape the way that I was operating even as a banker. Yeah, it's always about solving a problem, a need for my customers. And that kind of played to my strengths, right? Because clients really wanted to work with me because I could offer them something much more than what they bargained for.
It's spot on about solving a problem because that's the resourcefulness aspect of an entrepreneurial mindset. You can actually use that in a corporate setting as well. And so you're adding value, not just to yourself, but to the team, to the company by having that way of thinking. And what is it that you're doing right now?
Okay, back to my story. So I became an entrepreneur and built two companies. One was a fintech in Singapore. The other one was an AI technology company. So I came to Vietnam, or Hanoi in particular, to really build up my tech team. But I got more than what I bargained for, what was a calling, which I thought was much bigger than building a company. And that was really trying to come back and help, and contribute to the thriving startup ecosystem in Vietnam. So that led me to my current role where I play as a venture builder, VSV Capital and VSV Foundation. At VSV Foundation, it's really around working with much more social impact startups and helping them build out the business, raise capital, and help them to scale and be successful in their ideas.
And what's a typical pain point for many of these social impact startups?
So what I'm saying really is people have great ideas, but it's like, how do you actually make those ideas very commercial, like bringing commercial acumen to that particular idea? So it's looking at the business model. How can I scale? How do I build an ecosystem around me to support? How do I get investors? How do I get customers? How do I test that idea if it's really viable? And this is where I guess my banking experience has really come home to roost, which is really allowing me to leverage everything that I've learned. And that's really around not just financial analysis element, but looking at businesses from a different perspective and then using my connection to reach out to my network and seeing and then connecting people. So I think in this world, it's not what you know, and it's really about building that ecosystem, leveraging the connections, and then helping connecting people.
Excellent. Given your experience in the corporate world as well as now in startups ecosystem, what do you see about women in leadership in these two areas? And what's your advice to young women?
I was young at one stage and I've always been a very ambition-driven person. So I've always wanted to be the number one in everything that I did, right? In my career, in my job. And I always have surrounded myself with mentors, right? So very early on, I had both female and male mentors. And I really believe in the power of the network. So I used to do a lot of networking, which means it takes a lot of time out of your day, whereby you can spend time with your family or friends. For me, it was really important to build that ecosystem, to have the network whereby I could call on people where I need support. But it's really having the belief in myself, having belief that I can do it. I know it's hard work. It's really having the confidence to really move out of your comfort zone. And that's really how my journey of entrepreneurship came along, because all these years I was very in a comfortable role, had a very good role, financially was doing very well, but I really wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone. I was put through many training leadership programs with all the banking organizations that I work for. And then people used to say to me, you're really good at this, that, and that. But then how do you test that you're very good? What is the litmus test to see how good you are? And that is really testing how good you are compared to yourself, right? So that's why I took the leap of faith and decided to go up my own, to really test whether I'm really good, to see how resilient I am, to see how good is my network, and to see what I'm really made of.
That's right. So you've called out some really important pointers about having mentors early, whether it's male or female mentors. And the other point is the power of the network. And there's no shortcut to that because you've got to be out there building those relationships so that when you want to call on them, there is a real connection and people are willing to step forward and provide you with that support. But in the process, you've also developed along the way a belief in yourself, like a kind of confidence, so that you can be on the edge to step out and to take on something new as part of your own fulfilling journey in life. I describe crisis as a setback, and it sometimes can be a failure. And it's one of those moments where you either die or you move on. So our response to the crisis is really critical. And as an entrepreneur, we would be facing a lot of these setbacks on a daily basis. And you actually alluded to some of these as you were growing up with entrepreneurial parents who kept expanding their business and what they had to deal with in terms of the time component, as well as always having to manage the cash flow for expanding the business and managing the commitments they had. In your own personal life, how did you deal with crisis or setbacks? And what practices do you actually follow?
I think everybody, like any economic cycle, go through cycles, right? Up and down. I'd say to people, when my life changed from a corporate slave into entrepreneurship, it felt like I was on a constant roller coaster ride. And it was always more downs than were ups. So there was more days of lows than were days of high. And so what I learned is I spent a lot of time questioning and introspection. I started to take on meditation. I always thought that meditation was too slow for me, right? Because I always loved fast sport. I used to do kickboxing. Anything was fast sport, that was me, martial art. Therefore, I never used to focus on yoga or Pilates or meditation because I thought it was too slow for me. But during times of crisis, I took time out to really look really within the finances, spend a lot of time in introspection, and really starting to look at mindfulness as a practice and meditation, which really helped me to finances internally within myself, which I guess it was there, but I spent too much time racing against the clock, always racing against myself.
That's a great point. The ability to slow down, because in a crisis, if we can slow down our reaction, then we have the opportunity to breathe and to really sense what we need to do next, rather than just do an auto reaction or worse still, get paralyzed and do nothing. So thank you for sharing those practices. And what sort of meditation do you do?
I now have a daily routine whereby as soon as I get up in the morning, I meditate for 15 to 20 minutes and I practice what is called creative visualization. And I spend a lot of time going through it, like my own guided meditation in my head. And I create a day that I want to achieve. And as I talk myself through all the things that I want the outcomes to be, and of course, practice gratefulness, and which is something that I've only recently adopted. And I find that for me, it's a lot more fulfilling. And yeah, that universe have a really funny way of granting you things, and it does it in its own universe timing, right? So I might want something so desperately, and doesn't mean I'll get it, right? Today, tomorrow, it might come next year.
That's right.
But I've got to put it out there, right?
Yes. And that's the power of the creative visualization to be able to create your day and the outcomes that you would like to have. And you can have a sense of fulfillment and control knowing that you've created that day. I want to talk a little bit about spirituality. Where are you in your spiritual journey?
I believe I'm a very spiritual person. Always have been. I believe in God. I always believe in the universe. And I believe, as I mentioned, about creative visualization and asking for things. And I learned that the universe doesn't give you what you want. It gives you who you are. So you've got to become that person and be ready to receive the gifts. And so that's what I've been recently discovering, because I used to always be very ambitious, always want things instantly now. But I've learned that you don't always get what you want at the time that's convenient for you, right?
Yeah.
It will come, but it come at a time you least expect it.
That's really profound. I've never heard someone say it quite that way. It sits really well with me. The universe gives you who you are so that you can get what you want, right? Versus what you want. Yeah. So you have to become who you are to get that. And it's that transformation process to get to who you are that will bring those gifts of what you want. Wow. Okay. And do you think it's possible for us to live a simple life?
Simple, everybody's different, right? So different and simple could mean different things to different people. So for me, I think the world's changed and is evolved whereby there's a lot amount of consumerism and also instant gratification. People want things right now, right here. So for me, I believe that people can live a simple life. Depends on what makes them happy. Looking back when I was growing up, I used to associate success with accumulating, amassing huge amounts of stuff, right? Like designer goods and labels and things, which like personifies that I'm a successful person. Like if I wear a certain brand of watch or wear a certain designer bag, then it shouts, hey, I'm so successful in the world. But I could be so empty inside. So for me, it's no longer that. It's really about I seek peace and I seek tranquility and I seek love and just the simple things whereby happiness is important to me to achieve what's happiness. Like I have a great day. I get to do the things I love, which is why I come back to Vietnam, be part of this ecosystem, be a change catalyst, do the things that is much more meaningful.
So what was that moment that caused you to make that shift? Was there like one particular incident, or was it just part of the natural growth and evolution?
I think it's part of growth phase as one goes through life. At one stage, we think like you have all these bags and then it all goes in the cupboard. Nobody sees it. You look at people who's so much worse off than you, and then kids who live very simple lives. They just carefree. And it's like, that was my life when I was a broke person. When I landed in an island in Indonesia, I was 7 years old and we didn't have to go to school. It was the best thing ever. We stayed in UNHCR compounds, but with the beach, we had nature. That was the best days of your life, where it's kid-free.
So in some ways, it's like going back to the basics. And it came from within you, right? Because it's like that journey, like that spiritual awakening you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably came along with you moving out to Hanoi and to be part of this entrepreneurial startup ecosystem. So do you have a vision around what you want to accomplish, or you're just allowing yourself to be guided by where you can contribute and what you can do?
I mean, my vision and my mission is to be involved as a mentor, helping, or a venture builder, helping these social impact startups in Vietnam. So I'm really interested in looking at climate change initiatives, renewable energy, and circular economy. They're the three key focus pillars for me. Looking at how can we preserve this earth? Because I think we're all interconnected in some way. And we have to really look at how do we preserve this earth for future generations. So we look at sustainability, we look at regeneration, we look at preservation as the key themes. And how do we do that? Go back to basics. Look at, for example, Vietnam, big in agriculture. In terms of agriculture, what are the key strengths? What are the key products of Vietnam? Rice, coffee. How do we preserve that? How do we scale it? How do we make it much more abundant for our people? All right. How do we enable that through technology and then best know-how? It's all about regeneration, like circular economy. One kind of ecosystem feeds into another ecosystem. And it's just like connecting the dots. And my role is to be that connector of dots to create a thriving economy based on that.
Okay, great. So you can count me in whatever that you're doing, because that's exactly what I'm doing as part of Impact Velocity as well. How do you look at sustainability? What's your definition of it?
For me, sustainability means two things. It means regeneration and it means preservation. If you look at last few generations, we've depleted a lot of natural resources on Earth. And if we don't do anything, this do not do anything option is not an option. We have to do something. So what do? We really need to look at regeneration and preservation. And that's through looking at the earth. What resources can we preserve? How do we scale that? How do we make more of that the same thing? So you're looking at what I mentioned about circular economy, right? You look at how do we then all interconnect each other and make, for example, like coffee. We look at coffee's foundation, but the Haskell coffee is then used for chicken feed. And then the chicken can be used for eco-farming. How do we sustain that? How do we build all the stuff around that to then feed them to another ecosystem? Because that's regeneration, that's preservation. So that's how I look at sustainability. Preserve what we have and build on that using technology.
Wow, great. We look at sustainability from the individual mindset first. So we look at it as the ongoing thriving of a living system. And that for anyone or any corporate or any group to really sustain what you talked about in terms of regeneration and preservation, they've got to own it as, that we are all part of this interrelated, interconnected world, and that we can have unintended consequences on each other if we are not conscious about that system view. I want to round off our formal part of the discussion by just asking you to use 3 words to describe thriving.
Thriving. Okay. For me, I think when someone's thriving, they're happy, they're fulfilled. So I would say happiness, fulfillment, and love. You have to have love to be thriving. You've got to love, not doesn't mean love someone, but love yourself. Be at peace with yourself and have that internal happiness. And then you thrive. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask you some quick questions.
Sure.
And don't think through that too much. Just answer it. What's your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book. The AIM. It talks about systems to create businesses. I'd say that's my favorite book. Yeah.
Great. And what's your favorite travel destination?
I have so many favorite destinations. It's really hard to pin down a favorite destination. I'm still for ethnic Vietnamese. I've actually not explored Vietnam. I don't know it very much, and I love to explore more. So I probably have to say it's probably Vietnam as a country because there's so much to explore for me.
Okay, cool. And if you could have dinner with anyone, who would that be?
If I could have dinner with anyone, I would say Richard Branson.
Ah, okay. And what's the most unusual food that you have tried?
Most unusual food. Okay, probably alligator.
Oh, where in Australia?
Yes, yeah, I had alligator pizza. Tastes
Oh,
like chicken.
okay. And if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I'd be able to forecast what's going to happen, look through my crystal ball.
Okay. And what's the best advice that you've ever received? Keep giving. Well, Chrystie, thank you so much for being candid and sharing your life and what you're looking at in the next phase of your spiritual awakening. I've enjoyed our chat.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. We've been trying to schedule this for a few
I
months.
know.
You were part of season 2 and now you've become part of season 3.
At least I'm still part of some season.
That's right. Oh, let's catch
Okay.
up soon.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh and Chrystie, for sharing your passion for entrepreneurship and making a positive impact. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur investor, looking for inspiration to overcome the challenges in your life, or simply curious about the stories that shape the change makers of our world, this podcast series is your gateway to a world of insight and inspiration. Be sure to subscribe to the Thriving in the Age of Disruption podcast, or follow Dr. Ramesh on LinkedIn and other social media so you too become a part of Dr. Ramesh's Thriving Network.